This happened to me and my girlfriend when we were in our late 30s while on a camping trip in rural Wisconsin. I've always been a camping fanatic ever since I was younger. My family and I would often take long camping trips in the mountains and stay there for a few nights, which I enjoyed. It was me and my girlfriend Maya, who is now currently my wife. We were going camping in a really secluded area of a national park. The park itself had a lot of good camping sites, but seeing as we didn't like camping near others, we decided to find a much more quiet spot. We ended up setting up our tent on a bank right beside a massive lake, which was exactly what we were looking for. So that evening, we had cooked some hot dogs over the fire we had built, and we're listening to the radio while drinking our asses off when my girlfriend turns the music down and asks, "Babe, did you hear that?" "Hear what?" I asked. My girlfriend had explained to me that she heard footsteps in the woods about 10 feet from the campfire. Fearing that it could have been a bear or perhaps a mountain lion, I get out my .22 from my bag and pointed at the tree line, but didn't see anything. I assured her it was most likely a deer and that we should get some rest as it was getting late. That night, we were both in our tent and my girlfriend had fallen asleep way before I did. Me, on the other hand, had trouble falling asleep, so I would constantly find myself rolling around trying to find a good sleeping position. Eventually, I fell asleep after a good 20 minutes, but was awoke to a loud, blood-curdling scream. It was nothing I've ever heard before. I sat bolt upright as my blood practically ran cold, wondering who or what the hell that was. At this point, I'm shaking my girlfriend, telling her what I heard, and that we had to get in the truck. Not caring what we left behind, we unzipped the tent and full-on ran back to the truck, but not before hearing the same scream again, this time right beside the lake. We got into the truck and sped down the gravel dirt road back onto the main highway, where we found a 24-hour hotel that was still open. This was by far the creepiest and most unexplained encounter I've ever had.
This event happened to me around last summer. It was probably the scariest story in my life, and I wanted to share it so hopefully someone learns from it. Something I've realized growing up, year by year, is that this world can be an amazing place, but it is filled with some super sick people. And unfortunately, I've seen that side of the world firsthand. I'm a very social person, and love the opportunity to hang out with friends whenever. I'm also the type of person who's always looking for the next big thing. I guess I should tell you, I was an 18-year-old male at the time of this story, and have a decent-sized friend group of both boys and girls. Throughout high school, we had done a lot of crazy shit together. Being just out of high school, we wanted to do something insane together before departing for college, and we all decided to go camping in the middle of nowhere for 3 days. Fun, right? And for some miracle, all our parents thought it'd be fine. So we had 6 people going. Me and my girlfriend Stephanie, my friend Brandon and his girlfriend Kaylee, and Steven and his girlfriend Sarah. We had decided to have 3 different tents for each group, for reasons you could probably guess. Being a former Boy Scout, I was aware of everything we needed to survive for 3 days. Food, water, and other essential supplies. Being rebellious teenagers, we also stocked up on plenty of booze and weed for a fun getaway. So, mid-July, we depart for a camping vacation. After hours of driving and driving down back roads, We eventually find a place that looks secluded, but not too sketchy like some horror stories. There were houses nearby, but not too close. Again, we weren't looking for a sketchy woods to camp, but unfortunately no service. I took at least an hour for everything to get set up. While the girls and Steve finished setting up the camp, Brandon and I took a look around while fetching firewood. We eventually came across a cool-looking trail. We weren't too concerned, because there were houses within a mile radius, and we assumed that those people had used the trail to hunt, which was big in this area, or animals used it. If you're wondering about our car, we drove a Honda Pilot, which was Steve's, that had plenty of room for us and our supplies. We parked the car rather close to the site, so we had eyes on the car at all times. The first night, nothing much happened. We rolled a blunt and drank a bit, and called it a night. The next day, we decided to explore the woods a bit, but Brandon and Kaylee stayed behind to watch the site and spend time together. We decided to go down a path we found earlier. Around 20 minutes down the path, Steve spots a metal fence. We approach it to find a cemetery. The cemetery looked old, but there were signs of activity there. And no, not some voodoo shit or cult, like flowers and notes left. And beyond the cemetery, we saw a bigger trail that had tire tracks and half-assed parking lot for the cemetery. We ventured down the path a bit more to spot some deer, then head back because it was getting late. That night, we really partied hard because we were about to leave the next day and didn't want to return with extra beer or weed. Now this night was the polar opposite of the other night. The other night was peaceful, and we assumed the same about this night. As we began to turn in, boy, were we wrong. Now, you would assume there would have been warning signs early in our trip, like a rusty knife on the path, or foot tracks around our side. No, not at all. All of us woke to a blood-curdling scream coming from Steve and Sarah's tent, as we heard the fabric being ripped. What we assumed was something sharp. I guess Steve hit the guy really hard with the flashlight, and was able to get both him and Sarah to his car. Now here's the issue. Steve's tent is the closest to the car, while the other two tents are closer to the trail. So, to get to Steve's car, we had to get past whatever attacked Steve and Sarah. Luckily, all our drunken selves were gone because before getting into the car, he yelled cemetery, and it clicked in my head. The trail on the other side of the cemetery. So I quickly grabbed Brandon, Kaylee, and Stephanie, and started running towards the trail. I used my phone flashlight to help see. You might think, why would you turn the flashlight on? Well, last thing I wanted to do was miss the cemetery and be lost in the woods, with the guy who attacked Steve. By the time we get to the trail, Steve and Sarah had gotten out from the site, and we could hear the guy chasing us, but from several yards behind. We were able to find the cemetery rather easily, and I hopped over the fence first. When we get over the fence, we noticed Steve had not arrived yet, so we all hid in the cemetery. Luckily to our advantage, it was pitch black by the time I turned the flashlight off, and we all hid in a complete silence. My heart stopped when I heard the metallic shaking, as if someone was climbing over the fence. The guy had tracked us down, probably due to the fact that Steve yelled, "Cemetery!" We all stayed still as we heard the ground crunch, as the guy took slow steps. When in fight or flight moments, you are capable of a lot more than you think, and your brain is put in some super high alert mode, or some shit. As the guy approached, I realized I had a small Swiss Army pocket knife in my pocket. As the guy's steps grew closer to me, when he was right about on top of me, I grabbed the knife and lodged it into the back of his knee. The guy tumbled to the ground, with a shriek of pain and the metallic sound as he dropped his weapon. Soon the pair of headlights came around the corner. Steve had made it. We all got up and ran towards the car. While I got up, the light gave me a glimpse of the guy. He was tall, bulky, and had the look of pure hatred in his eyes as he clutched the back of his knee, and by his side, a huge machete. I was the last one to get to the car, and even before I fully closed the door, Steve floated out of there. The girls were bawling their eyes out. We drove until the first house, where we politely knocked and asked for directions to a motel or something. It was a friendly old couple. They told us there had not been one for miles. They took us in and gave us warm food and a place to rest for the remainder of the night. In the morning, the man brought his hunting rifle with us to retrieve our stuff from the campsite. When we got there was nothing stolen, but all our tents were slashed up. The elderly woman called and made a report while we were gone, and when we got back, the officers were at their home, and we gave our statements. The officer said that there's not enough evidence to find the guy, but he promised a search. We headed home later that day. No one said a word on the way home. We were all processing what had really happened. The police unfortunately never found the guy. Yeah, college split us up a bit, but we barely talk about it as a group. It's been a year. My advice to all of you is please find a populated place to camp. I don't care if it's some Yogi Bear camp. Be in reach of help and the police. Stay safe, guys. Please.
I live in the country with my dad, and this happened to me just a few years ago after my parents had separated when I was only 8. We live on private property in a very secluded area of the nearest town, meaning we were completely isolated for most of the time. It could be a bit lonely sometimes, but we very much enjoyed being far away from other people, and that's just how we were and still are. One day, my dad had left for work and I would be home alone until he got back. I had been left alone several times, so I was used to it, and my dad trusted me very well. So, fast forward to around 3 p.m. I finished playing some video games and walked into the kitchen to get a snack. I looked to my left down the hall to see that the guest bedroom door was slightly open. This was very strange, as that door has never once been opened unless we have family over, so there was no reason as to why it should have been unlocked. Knowing my dad would have probably lectured me if he found out, I go into the room to see if the lock might have been broken. At this point, I call my dad while having my Xbox controller in hand when I accidentally drop it next to the bed. My dad, of course, doesn't answer, so I hang up and crouch down to get my controller. And that's when I see something under my bed. It only took me a few seconds to realize that there was someone under the bed. By some stupid luck, they were facing the other way so they couldn't see me. Trying to act like I didn't notice them, I simply walked out of the room and ran straight to the neighbor's house, which was about a mile away. Thankfully, they let me use their phone to call the police, and I led the police to where I saw the man. But just like in most situations like this, he was gone when the police got there.
I'm an Irish female, and this happened back in 2007, when I was in my mid-20s. Back then I loved going to clubs and dancing the night away. One particular night, I went out with some friends, which included my cousin Frank. We went to a nightclub, had some drinks, and danced to Daft Punk's One More Time, as well as other popular music at the time. I wasn't living in this town at the time, so I arranged to stay at Frank's house. We had the fridge stocked with beer for when we got back and planned on getting wasted. We probably left the club at around 1 a.m. and got a taxi to his house. Back at Frank's house, we spent a few hours listening to Led Zeppelin, Nirvana with a bit of Metallica thrown in for good measure. My cousin was in a rock band and loved the classics. At around 3 a.m., Frank's bandmate, Jack, called and asked if we could come over and stay. He had been clubbing at a different location and needed somewhere to crash. Frank lived alone in a 3-bedroom house, and being a single guy, he hosted a few wild parties over the years. Frank told him no problem. He can come over, but explained we were having a quiet night. In other words, not to bring anyone else. Jack came over and seemed super friendly. Being the drummer of the band, he looked exactly like what I expected. Long hair, Zeppelin t-shirt, and ripped jeans. His behavior changed not long after arriving. He was super animated, and I don't know, just on a different buzz. He seemed drugged on something, and hey, as long as he enjoys himself, who am I to judge? At one stage, he started playing air drums, and continued with that for ages. During one of the air drum solos, I asked him something, and he didn't answer. I kinda nudged him, very lightly, but just to get his attention. Jack went crazy, and started shouting at me to never interrupt him when he was playing drums. Drums? Sorry, did he really think he was playing real ones? Anyway, this pissed me off. I didn't like the aggression. Frank said, Relax, man. There's no need to shout. Jack replied, No one should interrupt me when I'm in the zone, man. No one. Me and Frank eye-rolled and carried on chatting, drinking, and ignoring him. The atmosphere changed after that, and after a short time, I went to bed. I don't know how long after, but I was awoken from a deep sleep. I heard this breathing sound in my room. Still in a drunken slumber, it took me a few minutes to register that the noise sounded like someone inhaling. Someone was in my bed, with a bunch of my hair in his hand sniffing it. I froze, then said, What are you doing? Jack replied, Relax. I'm just smelling your hair. I'm not gonna do anything. Well, adrenaline coursed through me, but I was stuck to the bed with fear, and the room was pitch black. I shouted, Frank! At the top of my voice. And in speedy time, he ran in the room, turned on the light, only to find Jack in my bed, holding a handful of my hair. He said, It's not what it looks like, bud. I was only smelling it. I was sleeping facing the door, so could see Frank. I dared not to look behind me to see Jack, but his voice sounded like that of a child that knows he's done something wrong and is about to get in trouble. Frank lost it. My cousin apologized and said he did not want to kick him out of the house in the drugged up state he was in. The door had no lock, so my cousin slept in a chair in front of my bedroom door. Jack actually tried to come in again. I woke to Frank telling him to get the hell back downstairs, or he's going to kick him out of the house. Jack retreated once again. The next day he was gone by the time I woke up. But a few days later, when Frank tracked Jack down, he was told he'd been mixing drugs with alcohol and was embarrassed by his behavior. Even though it's been years since it happened, it still gives me the creeps when I think about it. Those sniffing sounds, big, deep, slow inhales, still give me goosebumps. The band broke up not long after that, so I never had to meet him again. I was told he was a good guy, so he may have been on drugs that made him super strange. I'm just glad Frank was there, or who knows how I would have got him out of my room.